Constitution was written, and it is not simply the executive branch's decision to disregard what Congress's will is. And that we have seen, unfortunately, too many times, time and time again. Some of the weapons that cause the destruction are made in the United States. Other weapons made in our country have ended up in the hands of militias in Yemen, some of which are on the terrorist list. These are just a few of the reasons Congress has voiced deep concern about American policy on these matters and why offensive arms sales to the Gulf face a rocky path forward when subjected to congressional review. Let's be clear. Congress's ability to review arms exports is upheld by law and upheld by long-standing tradition. In light of these concerns in Congress, did the administration come to us to negotiate a path forward? No. Did they listen to members on both sides of the aisle who wanted greater assurances that American weapons would not be used in the slaughter of civilians? No. Did they pay the least amount of respect to a co-equal branch of government and its legitimate and vital role? No. No, instead they employed an obscure and rarely used provision of the law to declare a phony emergency, ram these sales through, and undercut Congress's ability to carry out its oversight role. If there were a real emergency, if our security were under such an imminent threat that the transfer of weapons was the only way to prevent a catastrophe, then we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. It would just be approved because it would be a real catastrophe. But here's the reality. There is no emergency. Do you know how I know? I know because a real emergency would require weapons that can be delivered immediately. If you need them right now, you want weapons that can be delivered immediately, not months or even years from now, as these do. A real emergency would require weapons that have already been built and are relevant to whatever the immediate threat is. A real emergency would not justify building new factories in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to manufacture weapons that have been built in the United States for years and years. A real emergency would not be followed by our Defense Secretary telling us the threat has now diminished. Again, there is no emergency. It's phony, it's made up, and it's an abuse of the law, once again attempting to cut Congress out of the whole picture. This is not a dictatorship. We don't rule this country by fiat. Again, we are a co-equal branch of government. Remember when you were in school and you learned the checks and balances? Congress is a co-equal branch of government. We are not going to permit this to go by without a whimper. Just a few days before the administration notified Congress about this so-called emergency, we got a briefing on the threat that Iran poses in the region. I have no doubt that Iran is a threat to the United States, to our interests and our allies and partners. It's the world's most prolific state sponsor of terrorism. Its activities in the Gulf could paralyze commerce and air travel. Tehran has supplied the Houthis with dangerous weapons, and the Houthis have avoided negotiations to end the conflict, all while they've blocked assistance to help alleviate the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe. But this is nothing new. I obviously cannot talk about the details of the briefing we received, but suffice to say, though, we did not hear a single word about an emergency or a plan to move ahead with this sale. For this major fiasco, the administration quietly let us know on a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. It's really a slap in the face. Congress is going to have to give itself stronger tools before the administration just starts ignoring us completely. I have been working with Ranking Member McCall for months on legislation to make sure future arms sales only go forward if the country buying those weapons meets certain conditions. We'll also have to strongly consider changing the Arms Export Control Act's emergency provision, which the administration again has flagrantly abused in this case, and we're looking at every possible avenue for stopping these transfers before they go forward under this phony justification, including measures that members of this committee will introduce later today. But for now, I'd like some answers. I'd like to know about the process that led to this outrageous decision. I'd like to know who was involved, who thought it was a good idea to conjure up an emergency and cut an entire branch of the federal government out of the conversation. And we will get to those questions and others, Mr. Assistant Secretary, following your opening statement. Before that, I will yield to my friend, the ranking member, Mr. McCall of Texas, for any opening comments he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.